All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Brooklyn Aquarium Society live stream. This is David, otherwise known as D, because there's so many Daves in the world. Common like the clownfish. I'm here with tonight's special guest. A warm welcome, one and only Mr. Todd Gardner, who has spoken at our club several times, and I often go back and rewatch and re-listen to those presentations because I always have another question. Like I always have another question. It's odd you never get to be an expert in this hobby. I don't believe in the word expert when it comes to keeping fish and plants and these animals that we care so much about alive. But very knowledgeable person. So I know you guys are going to like the presentation tonight. And I want to welcome and thank you all for coming in. Brooklyn Aquarium Society, one of the oldest aquarium organizations in the US, getting ready to reach our birthday again next month. I'm going to post a lot of historical information that I have pulled up from the Brooklyn Aquarium Society archives to post on our YouTube Fun Fact channel that I'm coming up with, as well as our Facebook page. So you guys want to look out for that. Another thing I want to talk about is the meeting. We are almost 99% set up to do an in-person meeting. I do not even want to put the whammy on it. Stay tuned. If you're not already a subscriber to the Facebook page or the YouTube channel, click the subscribe button now. We're looking to have an in-person meeting next month. We're really looking forward to getting that in-person aspect of the club going again. But as we all know, there have been quite a few obstacles. So I'm hoping that we can get that set up and squared away for next month, March's second Friday of the month. So stay tuned in for that. As well as membership. There's going to be membership promotion going out in the next few weeks as well. Without rambling too much, and I'm easily the rambler, I'm going to talk to you about Mr. Todd Gardner here, professor of aquaculture. I always say agriculture, and I know aquaculture at Carteret College in North Carolina, right? If I'm
Yes.
not mistaken. Um, a wealth of information and breeder of over 50, I'm sure, maybe even more than that, 50 or more species that I've heard in previous presentations. Saltwater fish, freshwater fish, just a lot going into aquaculture and in my opinion, saving the hobby. So without rambling too much, I want to welcome Mr. Todd Gardner here. Hey, Todd.
Hi, Dee. Thank you so much. That was very nice. It's nice to be back. I think this is my second virtual lecture for Brooklyn Aquarium Society. I don't even remember what my topic was last time, but and so I apologize if I repeat too many of the things I talked about last time. But this is a new take to some extent. But I was thinking as I was getting ready for this about my very first Brooklyn Aquarium Society talk and realizing it makes me feel old. But I think my first lecture for the Brooklyn Aquarium Society in the education hall there on Coney Island was 23 years ago.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, it sure does.
Look, see all this gray. I didn't have gray the last time I think you spoke.
So yeah, and I've been there so many times since, both as a member and as a speaker, and it. I have to say, it doesn't. It just doesn't feel the same without getting my Entenmann's donut at the start of the meeting. There's always a whole bunch of boxes of Entenmann's donuts in the back of the room, and a little cup of coffee.
Our vice president, we spoke today, and she's like, "Oh, for a virtual meeting, maybe I should put some donuts on the side to make people feel at home."
That would be so funny.
Hopefully, we can get those Intamins next month. I mean, we've been working with the aquarium, partners over the last. I know we've been meeting at the education hall way before I've been a member, at least 50 years, from what I've seen, probably more than that. Um, and that's one of the things that we're going to touch upon. You've been working in the industry a long time in aquaculture with the closure of so many aquatic sources for fish and wildlife in the last year or so. The the emphasis on what we do as hobbyists in aquaculture and where we get the animals from and how we take care of the environment in which we collect and give back to is a main staple of conversation these days. So I know there's going to be a lot of questions. And since our last presentation, a lot has changed, man. And I think you've contributed a lot of positive to just the captive breeding of fish in the last few years have been like groundbreaking. From when I've been in the hobby a good 40 years. Not a lot. When I say it, I feel kind of old, but just I remember when there were no clownfish in the hobby, and now we have so many species of just that fish by itself that it's mind blowing.
Yeah, and that's really kind of the topic of tonight's talk is how aquaculture has shaped the hobby, and how our interests in the hobby also have shaped aquaculture, and how far we've come, and where I guess we're going, and obviously some of this latest legislation is on everyone's mind right now, and it's got us a little scared, as it always does. So I'll try to touch on that a little bit too. Not that I'm fully up to speed on it, but I will address that to some extent. I typically start out giving a little bit of background about aquaculture technology, and I'll do that again tonight. But so much of the early stages of marine ornamental aquaculture, because it really started way after the advent of freshwater aquarium aquaculture. A lot of it centered around the foods that were available to us, the live foods that were available for the larval fish. Unlike freshwater fish, so many marine species have a very small larval stage. And for a long time, for a long time, all we had was artemia. That was our one live food in the whole industry, and then this other one showed up, the rotifer, and just like with the fish that we end up culturing, often it's shaped by their life cycle, and it's like just like anything else we do, whether it's listening to music, it's shaped by the convenience. We've given up so much in sound quality for the convenience of the music files we listen to today.
I still love my CDs and albums. I tell you,
me too.
My wife calls me old, but there's nothing like an album. The sound that comes off an album.
For so long, we were restricted only to fish that we could raise using artemia, brine shrimp, because they were just so convenient. And for so long, so many of the fish we raised we were restricted to fish that were convenient to raise. We went on for 30 years of breeding marine fish without making any headway in that regard. I want to mention again about the rotifer from it. The rotifer is a multi-celled animal that swims around in the water, but it's very small. It's one of the smallest multi-celled animals. It's the size of a lot of protists. It's smaller than your average paramecium, which is a protist, a single-celled animal. And so the way that rotifers first came into aquaculture is a funny story. I may have told it before. Sorry if I have, but although aquaculture itself, we have records of it going back about 5,000 years. Most people agree that aquaculture probably started closer to 10 to 12,000 years ago, when we started with the rest of agriculture, when people started settling and growing things. But the way the rotifer entered the scene goes back just a couple of hundred years. And again, some of the first really intensive aquaculture was growing eels in Asia. And eels were a prized food, and it was something about their life cycle. Even though no one's really closed the life cycle of the eels of the Anguillidae family, the American eel and the other, diadromous eels that swim up into the rivers, they've been cultured for a long time, and it's a quirk of their life cycle that made them convenient to culture, which is that the adults would spawn out at sea, and then the post larvae would swim up into rivers, and they would get these, come in at these bottlenecks where they were very easy to collect by the millions. And they would collect massive numbers of these baby eels as they were swimming upstream and grow them up to market size. And the way they would grow them is to put them out into ponds, sometimes in pens in ponds, but they put them in ponds, and they would induce an algae bloom in the pond to help control water quality and to feed zooplankton that could be food for the eels. But rotifers first showed up accidentally in these ponds in huge numbers. They would get into such high densities that they would clear the algae out and just eat every bit of algae and outcompete all the other plankton. And they were regarded as a pest. And it wasn't until the 1970s that they found some really good uses for these rotifers. And in the United States, rotifers were used to raise the first ever marine fish with a true larval stage, and that was the redfish or red drum. And this was done at the University of Texas. And it was only after that Martin Moe, one of the pioneers of marine fish culture for the aquarium industry, adopted that technology of raising these rotifers that could be raised in very, very high numbers. And getting back to the convenience of this animal, the rotifer, another thing that made the rotifer such a suitable plankton for growing is that they reproduce asexually using parthenogenesis. They're all females, and they can produce eggs that develop without fertilization. And this cuts off part of the life cycle and allows them to reproduce very rapidly and in very, very high numbers. So with Artemia, what made them so convenient was that we could collect their dried eggs and hatch them on demand, as many as we wanted. With rotifers, what made them so convenient is that they were small and swam around and would reproduce and get themselves into such high concentrations that we'd have unlimited numbers of them to feed massive numbers of fish. So soon after Martin Moe got into his production of clownfish, Bill Addison, kind of on the heels of that, became friends with Martin Moe and built his own hatchery in Puerto Rico. And this is where I entered the scene. This was not until the 90s, but I met Bill through old-fashioned mail, writing letters back and forth, and he invited me to come down to the hatchery, and I went there and worked in this hatchery where now we're at this point 20 years into clownfish culture. Now clownfish have become very widely cultured. Forrest Young and Martin Moe together really honed the technology for raising clownfish, and then at the same time tried to take on as many other marine species as they could. The problem was there weren't really any other great foods available, so they would tackle species after species and try raising them using the same techniques as the clownfish, and realize that so many marine species just won't survive as larvae using this rotifer Artemia progression. They wouldn't even take rotifers. Either they were too small to take the rotifers, or the rotifers weren't nutritious enough, or they weren't attractive enough. So they took to using a lot of wild plankton to raise some of the more difficult species like angelfish and groupers and things. But what ended up happening was, for another 20 years after that, there wasn't a whole lot other than clownfish being produced. These are just some pictures of some of my old tanks at the Long Island Aquarium, where we were messing around with aquaculture. But during my time at Sequest and in the years following, the main idea was to grow lots of clownfish, and then we added in a couple of other families. But for so many years, all of our efforts went into finding fish that were raisable using the same technology rather than developing new technology. And so among those were gobies. We found lots and lots of fish in the goby family, could be raised using the same technology. They just had a little bit of a longer larval stage. I didn't put any dotty-back pictures in here, but dotty-backs were the other big family. So for a decade or so, it was basically clownfish and gobies, and dottybacks were the only three families of fish being produced through aquaculture in the marine aquarium world. And we dabbled in some other things too. We raised a few batches of royal grammas and decided they were too cheap and too much trouble to raise at that time, so we stopped. We raised some seahorses, and that was what my master's thesis was on, and we've had some good runs of raising lots and lots of seahorses. One of the big problems in aquaculture is when you try to scale this up and do this on a factory scale and meet the whole market demand, which everyone is hoping. Back in the days of Aqualife and Martin Moe really moving ahead with this stuff, people had this idea that it was only going to be a few years before the entire industry was supplied on 100% aquacultured fish. And it was frustrating to find that not only could we not even come close to raising so many of them, but even the ones we could, like royal grammas and seahorses, they either weren't valuable enough for all the trouble, or more often, the problem was that the techniques involved to raise them were just different enough from the standard clownfish model that it just didn't scale up nicely. There were too many different things having to go on in a hatchery. And when you try and mass produce something, you need to try and have a uniform, streamlined process. And even though seahorses will start off on Artemia and will grow fast, there's just so much difference in the techniques for raising them, and in the diseases and the parasites they get, and in the space and the flow and the lighting that they need, that it's just hard to mass produce clownfish and seahorses and royal grammas because there's just a lot of different technique involved.
So now that brings up a question. I'm going to jump in right there because there was a question posted, and I think you touched upon it. Somebody asked, how long does it take for you to consistently breed a certain species? And like, how long would you invest before you decide it's not going to happen? Like, I know we've kept, like, sometimes you can keep clownfish for months and months before you actually find that technique that develops a certain strain. Or like, how much time did you invest in trying to breed a species?
Well, that really, for me, I've had the luxury for a lot of my life. Right now, a big part of my livelihood is directly in fish culture. But for a lot of my life, I had, different. I've been able to raise fish for fun. Even when I worked at the aquarium and I was supposed to be raising fish as part of my job, my main job was keeping nice exhibits, and raising fish was kind of a thing on the side. And
a hobby, a dream.
As a college professor, I've been able to raise fish either on the side or as a supplemental thing. And so I haven't had to lean on that as my primary livelihood for most of my life, but there have been a few years, and it is, it's half of my income right now is marine fish culture. And so it really depends on where you're at and why you're doing it. But there's definitely, when you have the need to make it profitable, you have much less patience. When you're doing it for fun, you have the luxury. I mean, I spent 15 years trying to raise the Leiopropoma, the Swiss Guard, and the candy bass. And I took my time, and in the end, I raised a very small number of them. But it was worth it, and I loved it. Right now, I wouldn't invest that much time into, who knows if I even have that much time left at my age, but I wouldn't invest that much time now. But I also have more tools. You don't need to invest as much time
Yeah, the
today.
know-how has
I did
increased.
back
The
then.
education has increased a lot.
Yeah, I know more than I did back then, but more importantly, I think I have tools at my disposal that I didn't have then. And one thing that came from this small selection of cultured fish is it started to change our perception of what makes a good tank and what makes a good tank inhabitant. And at the same time, as I was ignoring the whole coral reef tank revolution, but at the same time as we were forging ahead with all of this fish breeding stuff, the reef aquarium world was going in its own direction. These things were
Hmm.
happening simultaneously, and we watched. It's amazing. Just going back to the 80s, what our idea of a beautiful marine fish tank looked like, or what our idea of suitable marine fish were to have in your tank. That's changed an awful lot. And it was shaped in part by the reef keeping revolution that brought about this idea of reef safe fish, having fish that A, won't eat your corals, and B, won't get too big and put out too much nitrogen for your corals, and C, won't eat all the rest of your fish. And this was actually this really helped and encouraged the aquaculture industry, because as it happened, the few fish that we were able to raise were mostly reef safe and stayed small. And now, reef as the reef hobby developed, people were looking for smaller fish for their tanks. Than when I got into the hobby, it was all triggerfish and big angels, and people were putting big parrotfish in their tanks. And it's amazing the things we used to want to put in our tanks that today we think would just be absurd.
What is that, a barracuda?
That's a barracuda, yeah.
I'm pretty sure I tried to put one of those.
Oh, I've kept dozens of them myself, of course. But we had this idea going back to the early days. We had this idea. We were watching what's happening in the food industry. The orange graph below is showing world capture fisheries for the food industry. Now we know we're putting out more and more boats and trying harder to catch more fish. So in spite of more effort, our catch of seafood has leveled off and maybe even is declining a little bit, but the overall consumption of fish continues to rise. And in the food industry, that difference is being met by aquaculture. And it's to the point now where more than half of the seafood that is consumed in the world comes from aquaculture, and that gap keeps growing, which is great. It's great for wild fisheries. And early on, we really expected aquaculture to take that same trend with aquarium fishes. But as it turns out, so many of the fish that we eat, if you think about it, so many of the fish that we eat come from coastal waters, coastal and temperate areas where there's a lot of fluctuation in water quality, where fish tend to be hardier. They're brackish and freshwater species. We eat a ton of freshwater species and brackish species and coastal species. So those fish are hardy. A lot of them have no larval stages or very big larval stages, and they're easy to raise. Virtually everything in the marine aquarium hobby comes from coral reefs. And coral reefs, yeah, we think of them as being coastal, but in reality, they're oceanic. They're situated far from big inputs of fresh water and runoff and continents. They're islands out in the ocean where water conditions are more stable, and the diversity is higher, and those fish have had the evolutionary luxury of specializing on very specific foods, unlike a fish that grows up in an estuary or a pond and has to just eat whatever's there. Fish in these very stable environments like coral reefs tend to be more delicate and more specialized, so they're more difficult to feed from their earliest larval stages all through adulthood. So it wasn't realistic for us to think that we could so easily meet the market demand in marine aquarium fish because of where they're from, largely. But one of the greatest revolutions, and I have to bring this into every talk because I have to give people the credit that they're due. I think the most important contribution, the thing that's catapulted us from clownfish and gobies to where we are today, and this is something we did realize 30 years ago, that copepods were going to be the answer. Copepods are what most of those specialized fish are feeding on. They're the most nutritious things out there for larval fish. And we would, when we would raise fish using wild collected plankton, we would see that this is what they were eating. And we tried for a long time to find the right copepod that we could grow in high enough densities and grow easily enough. And it was a huge challenge to isolate them from all the other plankton, one single species at a time, and find the ideal one. And there were a number of people that worked on this, but I think Eric Sten at Algagen really was the first one to isolate and commercialize 2 or 3 of the most important copepods that have allowed all of the breakthroughs that we've seen in the last decade in marine ornamental aquaculture. And Parvocalenus, the one shown here, really is the most important one. And now they've gotten out there, and lots of people have them, and lots of people are selling them. But he was the original one that got them out and made them available. And I think so many of the species that have been raised in captivity over the last 10 years were only possible because of that development. And this brings us to, again, where we are basically today. We've seen groups like Rising Tide at the Tropical Aquaculture Lab down in Florida have made incredible breakthroughs. Things like butterfly fish. We thought, back in the 90s and the early 2000s that this was a family of fish we were just never going to be able to breed in captivity. No one had ever gotten a larva, anywhere near metamorphosis, even through the very earliest days. So to see developments like this has just been so exciting for me. For the longest time, angelfish and butterfly fish and wrasses and some of these other families that we love to keep, but that weren't clownfish and gobies and dottybacks, just seemed untouchable. And if they ever were raised, it would have to be only using wild plankton. So the fact that we can raise fish like this with cultured plankton today is just amazing to me. And that brings us to tangs. Tangs and butterfly fish, I've always thought, were probably the 2 most impossible families of fish to culture. Back a few years ago, when I saw biota hitting the news with the new species they were coming out with, I was just so thrilled and jealous, insanely jealous, that they're getting these fish through that I could only ever dream of. But it gave me so much respect for them and what they've done. And going back to the evolution of the hobby, going hand in hand with this, and the parallel developments going on in the reef keeping community, which I'm not really too much of a part of. I'm in the fish world, but watching from that tank of bleached corals we saw earlier to some of our ideas of what makes a nice fish tank today. And to see that maybe these fish aren't captive bred, but to now know that the tangs at least could be. And we don't look at tanks anymore as these sterile things where we put in a handful of fish, but they're a whole ecosystem, a beautiful, amazing ecosystem. And this is my friend Felicia.
Wow, that's
has
nice.
These amazing. Even look at what's happened to the fish bowls. Remember what fish bowls used to look like? Felicia McCauley sets up these amazing little tiny reef tanks in a fish bowl that's just a couple of gallons.
Fish bowls aren't just for goldfish
anymore. That's right. Here's These are this last sequence of beautiful reef tanks. Incidentally, Felicia sent me these. These are from a variety of different aquariums from people in our hobby that have contributed these shots.
It's
But
so it's so funny because that first picture, I remember it had to be in the 80s. That bleached coral was like that was like the holy grail. You had to have the dead acropora in the back. Like
yeah,
that was the sign of you were a real hobbyist if you had like what looked like a coral reef tank, but they was all bleached out. And we would take them out and scrub them every couple of months, and put it back in there, to
yeah,
come from
bleach
that
them, set
to
them out in the
this.
sun, and
Yeah, leave it out there in the barrel.
yeah, and now if there's a dead coral, people just they throw it away or they crush it up and put it in their calcium reactor.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, the whole hobby has come such a long way. Um, and even simultaneously, of course, now anyone who keeps a reef tank is doing aquaculture too, because these corals, if they're living, they're growing, and if they're growing, just like a plant, they're going to need to be trimmed back eventually. So this brought about the dawn of the frag swap, and people, like I said, if you're keeping corals, you're growing corals, you're doing aquaculture. But there's also aquaculture, of course, going on out in the wild here. Oh, he's the zoanthids, of course.
Ah,
They
zoas. That's too many zoas to name anymore.
I
There's no.
know.
I
Here, these
cannot
are
keep track
Colin
of any
Ford's
zoa
zoas.
names.
He just posted these. I borrowed this picture
Unbelievable.
from him. He's got this down at Coral Morphologic, and these are all the rage right now. Some of the easiest corals to keep, and the price is going through the
Oh, the
roof.
price is
The demand is
astronomical.
just amazing.
I took
Right?
my wife to her first. I usually, my daughter and I have been going since we used to meet at the Pace University. I mean, me and my daughter used to go. I took my wife for the first time, I think 4 years ago. And when she saw how much these corals were, she was like, I know you're not paying that much for. I mean, some corals now are easily over $1,000.
Yeah.
And that was like before. Now with the some of the places being closed down due to the shutdown of somebody, the prices have even jumped even higher.
Yeah.
That's one of the great things about biota. You mentioned biota, and they're one of the leaders in coming up with new ways of aquaculturing fish and clams, especially things like clams and coral, and giving back to the hobby with some of the, some of these animals were disappearing from the reef. So it's been really important for us to put emphasis on aquaculture and and us as hobbyists doing more internal trades instead of pulling from the wild. So, companies, organizations such as Biota are really a big staple.
Yeah, and another great thing that Biota and a lot of other groups that are doing coral propagation out in the wild is that they're simultaneously growing corals that can be sold to the hobby, but they're also creating habitat. And most of them, Biota included, a big part of what they produce are being planted back to rebuild reefs. And then there's a benefit that I think most people don't even think about. I'm always defending aquaculture because it does get a bad rap in some circles. But one great thing about growing something like a coral, and it's in many ways the same benefits you get from growing oysters or even kelp, is that these animals, if you're growing them out in the wild, they're removing nutrients from the water. And those nutrients are things like carbon and nitrogen, things that we're concerned about building up. And so whether it's a filter feeding animal like a clam or a scallop or an oyster, or whether it's something that's photosynthesizing like an algae, or whether it's something that's doing both like a coral, as you grow them and remove them, it's a net nutrient export. And at the same time, all of those things, most especially corals, are also providing habitat for so many other animals out there. So there's a lot of good coming from that type of aquaculture, growing things that are at a very low trophic level in the environment that are providing habitat and removing nutrients. And and Biota is doing a lot of this with corals. They're growing and replanting corals. They're growing and replanting clams. A number of the fish species that they're working on are, a certain. I haven't been there to their main facility in Palau, even though I've been
Palau. I was getting ready to ask you where they're located.
I've been a Biota employee for 3 years now. I think it's about time I go to Palau. But anyway,
come on, put it on the list. List.
I'm sure they would send me. The problem is that, like most of us, I'm a slave to my fish, and it's very hard to get away. But anyway, this is some of the staff at the Palau facility, where again, I think these are clams here in this image, but they're doing great stuff with fish and corals as well. And it was so exciting to me to have the opportunity to not only come on board as a producer for Biota, but also that nurtured a relationship between Biota and the college where I work right now. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so let me just tell you the basics of how Biota, what I know about Biota. Like I said, I haven't been there, but their main production facility is in Palau. They also now have partnered with the Oceanic Institute in Hawaii, and the Oceanic Institute is a marine research branch of the Hawaii Pacific University, and they do a tremendous amount of aquaculture research and development there. And so Biota has entered a partnership with them, and has a section of their research facility that's devoted to producing Biota fish. And there's employees there of Biota, and they get the expertise of people at the Oceanic Institute, and they've done some amazing things there too. And then we have our latest branch, Biota North Carolina. Here's Tom Bowling on the left, and there's me and James and Victoria and Chloe. Victoria is our intern this semester. James and Chloe are both Biota employees now, and all of them are students of Carteret Community College. So,
man, I wish they had programs like this when I was going to college.
Yeah, seriously, me too.
Facilities. I mean,
man, so we've had students like James, who was really interested in the hobby and moved here from the Midwest to specifically to come to the college and learn about this and get into marine ornamental stuff. And we've had a lot of other students that came in to learn about, growing oysters or shrimp or something for food, and then got a look at all this aquarium stuff, seahorses and grommas, and just kind of got sucked into it, and now are getting involved. And we get students involved with this project every semester, and they love it. And then we end up hiring out of that pool of students and interns and volunteers as we grow. And we do definitely have plans to grow here. We're slowly chipping away at taking every little bit of space we can inside this facility. And we already have the president of the college is on board with it and excited about it, and already talking about building the next building to help us grow. So a lot of exciting stuff happening. This is one small room that we rent. So Biota is renting this space, and this is primarily for our brood stock. We have brood stock of some grommas in here, and some coral beauty angels and seahorses, and a handful of other things. And then we have a lot of shared space outside of here, our plankton culture areas and larval rearing room. And it's nice too, because at a college where you're teaching aquaculture, you have students coming through and doing the labs, and you want to show them the whole process. But then you have breaks. You have a month-long winter break, and you have a 3-month-long summer break, and you have holidays, and you have periods where there's no reason to keep all of the stuff going. You can have someone maintaining some fish tanks, but in order to show them the whole process of producing phytoplankton and zooplankton larvae, and taking the fish through their whole life cycle, and keeping the brood stock in spawning condition, you can't just turn that off and then ramp it up when the semester starts. And it's a lot of trouble to keep it going through those breaks. So by having Biota partnered with the college, we are keeping all of that stuff going all the time. So when students need to look at larval fish or hatching eggs or, get their hands wet with raising phytoplankton, it's all going all the time. And that's a really great benefit to the students.
Yeah. I'll just give a shout out to one of our high schools here in Brooklyn, Abraham Lincoln, which maintains an animal lab of about 40 or so tanks. And I volunteer in the summer there, and I work there throughout the year. And I see that we have interns, and it is a lot of work. People do not realize, as you said, it doesn't shut down when the semester ends. They have to maintain those systems, cleaning tanks and changing water. I mean, we were checking air conditions last year because it got really hot. One of the air conditions broke, and somebody actually brought in a unit. It is a lot of work, and just the fact that you're breeding fish there, that puts a extra emphasis on visiting those systems.
Yeah. And speaking of high schools, another cool development that we've had this year is that Dave Serino, our department chair, got a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to get us sort of an outreach situation where we're teaching our introductory aquaculture course in a couple of area high schools. So we go there, and we're teaching in two different high schools, and we're doing it partly remotely. We're in one classroom at a time, but broadcasting between the two. And they're taking our introductory aquaculture course, and it's fun, talking to the students at the beginning of the semester and asking them what they're doing and why they're there. And almost all of them say, well, I think marine life is cool, and or this just sounded more fun than taking, economics or whatever else they were going to take. So a lot of them don't even know why they're there. But last semester was the first semester we did this. And one of the things that we do is we set up each student sets up a very small tank, about a 5-gallon tank, just with a sponge filter in it. And they put a little something in it, a crab or a shrimp or a minnow or some little fish. And they cycle the tank, and they watch the development of the tank through the semester. And at the end of the semester, these students now are asking, can I take this home? Well, can you help me? Can you advise me on I want to take my fish home.
They
I have
get
a
the
mutton
bug
snapper here. I want to take it home and grow it up. And so I ended up letting them all take their sponge filters home, and then advising them on, where to get cheap tanks. And I about half of the class turned into an instant marine aquarium hobbyist over that semester. And I thought, boy, this is great for our industry. I need to get some industry support in here and get some cool stuff donated to these classrooms, because we're churning out new hobbyists right here.
Come on, all these companies out here. Come on, ZoomEd. We need those low boy tanks. These are future fraggers. Imagine if they all had one coral to frag, like their project was to frag one coral, or breed one fish. Future aquaculturists out there.
So, yeah, I think that's a no-brainer, I think. And, we feel like there's so many assaults against our hobby right now that the idea of getting more people into it is really appealing. And there's really no better tool for teaching so many lessons in science and biology and physics. There's so many lessons to be learned. Last night, I met a couple that were English teachers, a husband and wife. They're both English teachers, and they both have aquariums in their classrooms that they incorporate into their curriculum in an English class. I don't even know how that works, but it just goes to show there's a lot of great lessons that can come out of aquarium keeping. And a shout out to Felicia, incidentally, Felicia McCauley, who I'm sure all of you know.
I saw this on Instagram.
One of my favorite aquarium hobbyists of all time, and such a great promoter of our industry, and now an employee of Biota too. She handles all our social media.
Oh, wow.
And it's terrific to have her as a coworker and helping to promote the stuff that we do and the fish that we raise. And So I came into the picture and brought in a lot of what I have been working on the last few years, brought some cool new fish to the table, but really it's been an inspiration seeing what else has come out of
Anthias.
biota, out of Palau and Hawaii, and fish again that were just, some of these fish, we like the Bourbonius anthias, not only is a fish that we never dreamed of even raising. I think this was raised for the first time by Karen Britton, to give credit where credit is due. But biota picked up some broodstock and continued on and started producing these. But this is a deeper water fish that just a few years ago, not only did we not think it was something that could be raised, but it wasn't even obtainable like in the hobby. It was just too deep and too rare. And this is a fish that now is, it's still expensive, but it's out there and being bred, and it's getting out. And like all these crazy expensive fish, once they get into culture, the price does slowly come down too. But the coral beauty, I've always thought the coral beauty is maybe the single most underrated fish in the whole hobby, because it's always been cheap and common, but so beautiful. And an angelfish, just such a classy fish in every way, and pretty hardy and exquisite. And I have to give Kathy Leahy credit here for being the first one ever to raise this fish in captivity. And also, and as far as I know, she was the first person ever in the world to raise any species of angelfish 100% on cultured copepods. So these were copepods from Algagen, Parvocalinus from Algagen. And to me, this was a giant turning point. And I'm thrilled that biota has now picked up production of these guys, and we've gotten some of their broodstock now at the North Carolina facility, and we have our first batch now just approaching metamorphosis, and that's something that's really so exciting for me to watch in person.
I didn't know you guys were aquaculturing coral beauties, actually.
Yeah.
And now, would you consider them, that there's a big thing about coral beauties? Now, some say they're reef safe, most say they're not reef safe. I wonder if there's any difference between aquacultured coral beauties and wild caught ones.
Well, it may be too soon to say in terms of, what they're going to feed on in the tank. My observation with aquacultured fish versus wild caught is that they're infinitely easier to pair and to keep together, because so many of these fish are aggressive, and even if you are lucky enough to get a male and a female, or an immature pair that could develop into a male and female, so often they just murder each other. We watched back in the 90s, we watched tens of thousands of dollars worth of wild caught dottybacks murder each other in the broodstock tanks.
You put them together.
Sometimes even after they were spawning, they would still kill each other. But we also then saw a couple of generations in, they got more and more peaceful with each other. And so that's one nice thing that comes of it. Another cool thing that's happening.
And the coral beauty, what do they get, about 4 inches, 5 inches?
Yeah.
4 or 5 inches.
But some more cool things coming out of biota in Palau right now is they've identified some really awesome little tiny gobies. Some of them are gobies we haven't even seen in the trade before. So often, so much of our history in wild collection is going after the big showy fish, that a lot of little tiny gobies have been overlooked by the commercial collectors. And now, as we seek more and more reef safe fish, and fish that are safe for tiny little fishbowl reef tanks like Felicia's, tiny, pretty little gobies like this are becoming very popular. And so these are fish that collectors never would have touched because the price was too low and they didn't notice them with all those tangs and butterfly fish swirling around. But now that we're specifically looking for fish to propagate, to meet the needs of our evolving aquarium industry, we're rediscovering things like these beautiful little gobies. These are all little nano gobies. They are gobies that are really perfectly suited to little nano tanks. A friend of ours, Noah, who lives up around Greenville, he goes on Instagram by Noah's Nanos, and he keeps these beautiful little nano tanks. And he's like our biggest customer of these gobies. He has got so many beautiful pictures of these gobies. For all I know, some of these pictures might be his. Felicia sent them to me, but they might come from Noah.
I was wondering about that because is it safe, or I'm always scared, like dealing with dotty bats when it gets to gobies. I got a big yellow clown goby, which is like one of my favorite right now. Is it safe to put multiple gobies in a tank, or I'm always afraid of that dotty bat syndrome?
Well, I think it depends on the species, and I have to confess that I have never kept any of these three shown here. Some of the Elacatinus species that we see in the Atlantic will live in a small harem, but I've also put 3 or 4 together and had only one survive after the fighting's over. So not 100% safe to do that with some species, but other species like the Coryphopterus personatus, the masked goby, like they form little sort of loose schools or shoals, and they're beautiful, and they kind of look like the goby on the right here, but they stay up in the water column and they live in small groups. And I was just thinking that I need to get some of those and start breeding them again, because I haven't raised that one in 25 years, but it's a terrific little reef fish that would go right along with these guys.
Well, I had a little neon one very similar to that, and I learned very quickly that they're good jumpers.
Yeah.
Which surprised me. Something so small, it jumped pretty high. It jumped out of there.
Yeah.
And it got through that little mesh, which surprised me.
Another really great development that, and it's funny, I had a talk with, these are some of Biota's clams, to throw the beautiful clam shot in there. But another really cool development that I'm happy to see Biota getting into, and it's something that I talked to my friend Avier Montalvo and Noel Heinzen, two really amazing breeders out there, doing their own thing and going in their own directions. And like all of us, we've spent years chasing our passion of breeding fish in captivity, and especially trying to forge ahead with new species that haven't been raised before. And we talked about how difficult it is to make a living at it. And we were tossing around this idea of what if we started some kind of a cooperative where we get ourselves and a handful of other breeders and kind of try and pool our resources into one clearinghouse. And Biota is doing a bit of that, and I'm really happy to see it. So some of the fish here are from Bali Aqua Rich, another big producer. This marine betta on the right is from Thomas Rower, who's an extreme hobbyist out west. He's an engineer, I think. See something else. He does something else for a living, but like so many of us in this hobby, we make our living doing something, and we keep fish for fun, and then it gets to be a very serious hobby, and we kind of are walking this line between, is this my whole life, or is this just a hobby, or and so I know so many people growing corals and growing fish that love the process of raising the fish, but they really don't love the process of marketing and shipping and customer service and all of the other nonsense that's involved. And as I was saying before, the fact that there are so many little differences between the different species and between the different families makes it hard to scale up into mass production. There's around 400 species of marine fish in our industry, and no hatchery can meet that demand. No 5 hatcheries can meet that demand. So you almost need to follow this model of bringing together different companies, different hatcheries, different breeders, and having a common clearinghouse. And in the last couple of years, Biota's been providing an opportunity for people like Thomas and others. In fact, I'll say that if you breed some amazing, awesome fish and post a picture or a video on Facebook of a whole tank full of them, you're probably going to get a message from someone at Biota in a few days saying, "Hey, would you be interested in being our producer of that fish?" And I think that's awesome. I think that's just amazing, and it's great opportunities for people that love the process of producing, and it's great for a company like Biota that is doing so much good and really needs to meet that demand of the huge variety that we have in our industry.
I would
Here's
love to
another
be able to
example: the
breed those
tuxedo
betas.
urchin. Cleanup crews are so critical to. You almost don't put an animal, other than corals. You don't put an animal in a reef tank unless it's going to do a job. It's not only become, is this reef safe? Now, I like this thing; it's pretty, but is it reef safe? It's I'm only going to put this in my tank if it's going to do something. Is it going to eat algae? Is it going to eat algae? Is it going to absorb phosphates? Is it going to eat aptasia? So you have, a proper reef tank. There's a lot of planning that goes into every animal, and the tuxedo urchin is a master of eating hair algae.
Oh yeah, they're awesome.
And so there's my friend Bill Catman works at. Now the name of the college is escaping me, but a college up in Michigan, I think, Augsburg University. Glad I thought of it. Bill Catman has a little program where he's teaching aquarium science and aquaculture to his students, and they're going through the motions of raising this and that, and they hit on a great technique for mass producing these tuxedo urchins. And again, they don't want to have any part of sales and marketing and all that stuff. So we're moving their urchins for them. We're giving them an outlet and a way to make some money, and it's allowing us to expand the variety on our availability list. So I love these trends that I'm seeing, and I love being a part of it. And I know that we get really upset when we see things like this latest piece of legislation. And I certainly don't want to see it happen, but I think we have to look at it realistically too, and say, as other things have shut down, we've managed. And it was like the end of the world when Hawaii was shutting down collections, and most of us still hope it opens back up. But at the same time, that has added extra economic incentive to try even harder, to put more efforts into raising some of those endemic Hawaiian fish. And that process is already underway, and it's one of the things that gave the economic incentive to, it was millions of dollars of investment to get these yellow tangs into production, something that a few years ago we never thought we would see. And the shutdown of Hawaii really helped boost that effort and allow it to pay off for the time being. And other Hawaiian endemics like Potter's Angels, I already know multiple people, including us, working on it, and it's only a matter of time before they're captive bred too, and we'll see better quality and less expensive Potter's Angels than we've seen in the past because of that. This latest amendment to the Lacey Act, it sounds terrible, and I hope it doesn't pass. But at the same time, it may provide some new opportunities for the world of captive culture. And we also have to be a little introspective about this and say, I think it was Marco Rubio of Florida who introduced this amendment.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's happened to South Florida, that's where the lionfish invasion started. If you go snorkeling in Boca Raton Inlet, you'll see an unbelievable variety of Pacific fish living there. if you walk down the street, you're going to see iguanas, and you walk into the swamps around there and you're going to see pythons, and it's turned into an environmental disaster. And we can't pretend that it wasn't the pet trade that is responsible for all of that. And so
And just to
we have to take some responsibility for creating a situation that made someone want to introduce this bill.
I'm gonna jump in, and just for people that aren't familiar with the legislation, without going in too much, legislation has been introduced in the last 2 years, with an attempt to put a more imposed ban on keeping animals, not only in the aquarium trade, but the goal of many of the private organizations, not so much public, but is to ban the keeping of many species of animals in zoos and public aquariums, as well as research facilities, and even as pets. So there have been several additions admitted to kind of change the guidelines of some of these bills. But as we're discussing, in this presentation, what this legislation is going into is this, I believe it's HR 45 something, but you can look that up on Google. There's a lot of information in regards to the voting on these bills, and they do greatly affect us. So you guys might want to take it among yourself to look in to your state legislation, as well as the federal legislation, because if some of these bills get passed, you may not see any of these fish in your local stores anymore. They've greatly increased the price of fish like the yellow tang, which I've seen going for over $200 now, and other species are disappearing from your local shops as well. So it is very important to educate yourself in the impact of these bills.
Yeah, This latest one is really, it's more about just making it very, very easy to have any animal that could potentially be harmful environmentally or to humans be just banned altogether from any kind of trade, from import and from interstate travel. And of course, some of the irony is, of course, dogs and cats are grandfathered in and will never be touched by this. And if you look at how many people get killed by dogs versus some of these other pets we're talking about, it's there's no comparison. But
well, we had it with the snakehead too. I remember it was a big thing.
Yeah, remember what that?
Snakeheads, and when they got too big, next you know, you had a snakehead in your local park, and
they were letting them loose, right?
Yeah, it could decimate a population.
There was talks about them walking on the ground, that they can move and walk around from shimmy, I guess, like a snake or something,
Yeah. Well, welcoming our president, Steve Matas, has joined.
How you
in.
doing, Todd?
Hello, Steve. Nice to hear
love
your
hearing
voice.
you talk.
He jumped in.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, we had, as a hobbyist, we have been a little irresponsible. I want to say a little, but there have been, like any other trade, there have been the people that introduce invasive species into the local environment, even plants like kabamba. I know they're outlawed and importing, exporting across the United States. But
I had those in my pond one day. By the end of the year, they were wrapped around motors, pumps. Everything was full of that. Joe gave me a piece.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a big thing this coming year. It's become a big political platform. Marco did mention that at one of the conventions last year, and it's going to be something for us as hobbyists to take responsibility for and to be aware of.
Yeah, and I think that again, aside from writing letters to our representatives, in protest of this, I think that one thing we definitely need to do is just try to be more responsible going forward, and recognize that this came about because of irresponsible practices in our hobby, and just own up to it and try to do better, so that these things don't get introduced in the future. But one great thing is that so much of what's being cultured already, I think there's just no justification for listing it as injurious or, or detrimental in any way. So hopefully, I mean, we're all afraid that, everything except dogs and cats is just going to be blacklisted somehow. They're having what's called a whitelist. Basically everything's going to be banned unless
Have to go on the black market to get
unless
fish.
it's on the white list. I know. Yeah, this is how black markets arise. But
Then again, my fish will jump in value.
but
It'll
I
be
do
worth more
think
than my car.
Well, if
I
they
think we
meet
have
behind
enough-
stores and back alleys.
I do think we have some pretty good proactive organizations and people in this industry that will work to make sure that the things we care most about that can be justified on that white list will get there. But let's hope that this doesn't even pass. So anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to touch on, but I think I pretty much covered it all. And
looking at the picture with the angel, I've always loved them, and I've always wanted to put one in my reef. And you hear different stories. You hear people that put them in their reefs for years, never have a problem, and then I've heard put them in their reefs and they just wreak havoc on some of the larger the LPSs, hammers, things like that. And I love the fish. And like you said, it's not an expensive fish. You find them all the time.
It is now.
Yeah. Well,
lately.
everything. I was in the fish store today. I just got a couple of fish actually, and just everything has gone up. The guy in the fish store was even telling me, he says it's not that the fish have gone up so much. The shipping has gone up like crazy.
Yeah.
The
well,
shipping is like doubled.
It's everything. It's the groceries and the gas and everything
That's
else.
it's not just the fish. You go in a store, you go to a restaurant, you eat, whatever you do now has gone up in price.
Yeah. Well, luckily I can't go out shopping because I'm stuck home with my fish all the time.
You got to send a fish shopping.
Yeah. Well,
the Mexican walking
also,
fish.
I do most of my fish shopping underwater too. So not that it's cheap to go out on a dive, but I do collect a lot of my own brood stock when I can.
Oh yeah.
Out on the water here.
That's another thing. That's another thing because I was looking at some of the dwarf killifish and some of the fish that we've actually bounced back in the hobby. Like a lot of things which were kind of disappearing or becoming harder and harder to find that we've started aquaculturing have started to bounce back. For a long time, there was a big thing about cleaner fish, like the cleaner fish, which were really, really big in the saltwater hobby in the first years, and you begin to see less and less and less of them. Have you guys looked into those as far as like trying to breed them?
It's been bred there, and it's we're working on getting that underway. I think part of the decline of the cleaner fish in the trade was about the fact that they're not a hardy fish. They're not an easy fish to keep, and they're a beautiful fish, and it's awesome to watch them do their thing and clean your other fish.
Yep.
But so many people would be like, "Oh, I'm going to get a cleaner wrasse to help combat the ick in my tank," which is a terrible idea because it's one of the most prone fish to protozoan infestation there is, and so it's not going to control your ick. It's not going to control your parasites. And if you put one cleaner fish in with 2 tangs and an angelfish, and it only has those 3 fish to clean, it's going to start pestering them too. These guys in the wild are cleaning a steady line of fish coming through, and they're a delicate fish. If you have a big, nice, healthy reef tank, it's an awesome fish to have in there. It's amazing to watch it in this symbiosis with the other fish. It's pretty. It has a beautiful flowing swimming motion.
It's always moving.
But like so many other fish, the average hobbyist realized that this isn't a good fish for my 20-gallon tank, and it doesn't survive very well in a small tank like that.
No.
So it just waned in popularity. I think that's the main reason we saw them decline.
You know, a lot of
And
times you have problem with them eating too. They don't always take the food right away. I've had
yeah,
several
well,
over the
talk about
years.
I was talking earlier about how
Special diet.
specialized the feeding is in a place like a coral reef.
Mm.
And that's, you know, one of the ultimate specialized feeders right there. So it shouldn't be a surprise that a fish that has evolved to eat parasites and dead skin doesn't want to eat your tetramint
Flakes.
flakes.
Yeah, yeah.
Flakes.
You know what? It's funny because I've had one that I just now switching tanks over. I lost him. I've had him about 5 years. He's a big cleaner ass, nice. He would eat anything I put in the tank. And I was all the fish I transferred from one tank to the next, I'd moved my 180. He's the only one I lost. And I
Oh,
was
so
he
sad.
went in the tank, he did dive for the bottom, and he never came out.
Wow.
And he's always so active. He's in front. Like I said, I throw flakes in there, I throw pellets in there. I could pretty much throw anything, and I throw a piece of meat in there, he'd probably eat it. You know, and like I said, that was the longest I've ever had one because I've had some. You put them in a tank, they stop, like I said, picking on the fish, cleaning, and a short while after they don't want to eat, and they just stop eating. You know. And,
Well, I would guess that in the next year or two, you'll see these available captive bred. So and
captive
then they
bred,
should
yeah.
also be hardier and more willing to accept different foods too. So don't
You,
lose
you
hope on the cleaner wrasses.
you do see in more stores things laying captive bred. Whether they are or not, we don't know. You know, I bought a couple of bang guys maybe 3 months ago that were captive bred. They're fine. They'll only eat mysis. They will not eat flakes. They will not eat pellets, but they're doing good. Again, they say they're captive bred. You can't tell when you're going to the store. You're taking somebody's word for it. You hope they're on the honor system a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
But
But
you
now,
do see more and more fish that, like you said, are captive bred in the last few years, you know, and that you never saw before.
but now, if you get a new species now, like now I'm talking to the potential breeders out there. Like when you get a new species, and it's not really looked at a lot in the saltwater hobby. I know a lot of freshwater hobbyists are willing to throw their chips into the hat, but now you want to, let's say, I know that's a hard species, but like this coral beauty, how would you like how would you go into trying to initially breed it? Like,
How would
it's not
I?
like
Sorry. Go. What was that?
like how would you initiate attempting to breed it? I mean, it's not like saltwater fish. We're not so quick to go out and get 6 of them and try to breed it.
Yeah, well, everyone has a different approach. You know, if you're near the if you're near the ocean and you're near where these things live, most people will agree that the best thing to do is to go get go find a pair in the wild that's already an established pair and an adult, and get them right in the tank, and
Mm.
don't even treat them because they're the treatment process is stressful. But if I'm here in the United States and I'm gonna my source of fish is a pet store, then usually what I'm gonna do is get a couple of individuals that are immature
Mm,
and run them through my normal quarantine treatment at least 2 weeks, and treat them with a combination of some kind of copper compound and formalin,
mm,
um, and then get them into their main tank and let them grow into a pair or a harem. Um, and that's assuming that I have something that's a harem spawner or hermaphrodite.
mm.
Um, but I like to always start with immature ones. I find that adult fish, even though some people have this idea that, well, if I get immature fish, it's going to take twice as long or 5 times as long before they're spawning. Immature fish will adapt better to aquarium life than large fish. I never start with large adults when I'm trying to put together a new brood stock. I let them get comfortable in the tank. I like to have them established in the tank before they reach sexual maturity.
Oh, okay.
Let them grow into being a pair or a harem together.
These
And
also
then,
change sex then as they're growing, like clowns,
well,
or
I mean, a lot of the species I work with do, and some of them we don't even know, and some of
how
them
do
we're
you
just
sex
finding out.
these?
What?
How do you sex these? Can you
I
tell by
can't
looking?
sex any. I don't know what, there's a few fish that have very clear sexual dimorphism or sexual dichromatism, but it's more the exception than the rule. Most of the fish I work with, I can't tell one from another.
So they're
So you
just
just have to watch them,
I put
like
two.
doing a
I
mating.
mean, people will tell me, that they can tell the difference between a male and female Royal Grama or Neon Goby or something, and I'm sure they can. I can't.
Neon Goby, they got good eyes.
I put a couple of small ones together and hope we get a pair, and I've had pretty good success doing that. And then a lot of other things that I work with, like the Leiopropoma, are simultaneous hermaphrodites. Any two you put together ever will be a pair. So.
So now I'm assuming if these breed, the babies are very tiny.
Yeah.
So like I've seen babies on Bangais. What do you feed them that small?
Well,
They're not
Bangai
crushing
cardinal doesn't
flakes.
even have a larval stage. That's one of the
Bangais,
biggest
Bangais come out
juveniles you're going to
swimming.
get out of a marine fish. So that you start them right on brine shrimp. And
Really, baby brine?
I got
pellets.
I got three species of those cardinals now that I love: the spotted, the Bangai, and the pajama. And they're like amazing fish once they're paired up. Like once they paired up, they're
Yeah.
obvious pair. Like it's.
I had Bangais years ago, and in my refugium, every once in a while, I would see these little tiny babies, but they were so small. I'd never caught them or anything. Every once in a while, I'd see them, and then you wouldn't see them anymore,
Oh.
And I didn't know what to feed them,
Well,
what to do.
you need to cultivate a little bit more of a plankton population in your refugium, because a lot of people have good success having them just raise themselves in the refugium. Because again, the Bangai cardinal fish is one of the few marine aquarium fish in the trade that don't have a larval stage, and so you could, if you wanted to, get
So when you say don't have a larva, in other words, they eat as soon as they're born, or they don't have to wait to
well, they hatch out and they're a juvenile.
They don't have the
a
yolk sac.
A larva is like an embryonic stage in development that takes place outside of an egg or outside of a uterus. So a larva comes out, it looks nothing like the adult and eats nothing like the adult. So like with things like the tangs and the angelfish and the basslets and things, they come out, they hatch out. They're not even eating anything for the first few days. And then when they're ready to eat, it's something that is microscopically small and alive. It's a copepod nauplius or a ciliate or something. And that's why it's taken so many years to get these fish into production. So the Bangai cardinal fish, it's like a guppy. It's not quite a live bearer, but when a baby guppy comes out, it's just a mini guppy that eats the same things as an adult guppy eats. And that's not to say Bangai cardinal fish are easy, because they're challenging. It's hard to separate those young from the adults, and it's hard to get a really good healthy spawn. But if you do, they will start right in on brine shrimp or even on TDO or some other little pelleted food,
using copepods
without all the larval rearing techniques that these other fish require.
And then the parents stop eating, so that's another problem.
Yeah,
that's
the
another
father
problem.
doesn't eat while
Like
he's
the
holding
father's
the
not
eggs.
eating, and I'm like, I watch him change. They go through this color sequence, and they almost look like they're fading, like they lose all the color. And it's like, oh man, at what point do I It's a lot of respect that goes into facilities that breed on such a large scale. Even I was looking at your slide with the big huge tubs that these guys have in. It's very like susceptible to like changes. They're outside, you get the crazy weather thing, heat wave or something like that. It's remarkable.
True. Yeah. And all these animals, they live in a very stable environment, because they're subject to weather out there too, but they're in the ocean. And so, a rainstorm barely touches the salinity out on a coral reef, and a cold snap barely does anything to the temperature. So they live in a real stable environment. We put them in little tanks on land, and all of a sudden conditions can change rapidly, and they can't take that stress.
And one of the things I'm looking at Biota's website, because I know I was looking at them a while ago. Now, are you familiar? They actually sell a sustainable aquarium.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like
I
a
know the
package.
aquariums.
Like
They
I'm really like I didn't know that. I was just looking at the site, and you can actually go on the site. I think I posted it a while ago, and not spawn. I'm not promo or pushing biota, but like I was talking about breeding fish. They actually sell a package which has the tank, equipment, a food supply. They give you a pair of fish. They give you the rock. Like for a person coming into the hobby, like if I'm talking about I want to try to come into the hobby and breed fish, these guys actually sell a package with everything. like it's actually very impressive. And the fact of the matter is you're getting something that is sustained. It's aquaculture at the facility. It's not impacting the environment. That's pretty much as good for the hobby as you can get.
yeah, yeah. I I should get one of those tanks. I should get them to. I should get some of those tanks in my classroom.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
looking at it. I'm really actually I was before we went on live, I was telling Todd, a friend of mine breeds fish, keeps freshwater fish, basement full of fish, great breeder. I could give him a fish I've had 2 years and he could breed it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. But like a person really hesitant to go from freshwater to saltwater or vice versa, to be able to go to a resource which is, you know, has the fish and that and aquaculture fish I find to be pretty much way hardier than wild caught fish, only because the transportation and the shipping takes a lot of toll on the fish. That's a really good way to get a person or a student or someone new to the hobby into the hobby.
Yeah. 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 When you think about how many people have you known over the years who spent a bunch of money and got into the hobby and then had, 2 or 3 tank crashes and lost a lot of fish and said, forget it. I don't want to keep watching fish die. And they left the hobby. So, you know, uh, they, it, there was a time I felt where there were a lot of shady pet shop owners who almost set you up for failure to keep you coming back. And I think the whole industry has realized now that the best thing for the hobby is to set the new hobbyist up for success. And I think
Exactly.
tanks like that are great for that, because it's, to go out and have to research every different component for your very first tank, where you're not trying
Yeah.
to set up a big reef tank. You want to keep a couple of gobies, or you want to keep something simple and
Exactly.
hardy. But there's still a lot of work that goes into, you know which which filter and what size should I get and what kind of substrate, and to any of these packages that come where it's
It's
well thought
overwhelming.
out,
Yeah, it
and
could
it,
be
it
very
comes all
intimidating.
together. It's setting you up for a good experience at the start.
Yeah,
Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
you got it. Yeah, I
Well,
just told,
we
I just shared it here because you're set up easier for success with getting a full package than going out there. Most of the time, I mean, if I had $1 for every time I went to a local pet stop and I saw somebody just buying a bunch of stuff, like, we that have kept a long time, you're so trying to fight the urge to say something, but it's
you know,
like
I
you
say
don't.
something. The worst part is when they buy the tank and the fish and
And the
everything in
fish.
one day. The fish are inside the tank.
Oh
Yeah.
man, it makes me want to cry. Like I look at that fish like, you poor guy. I mean,
A fish store
but
that used to be on Nostrand Avenue. When Nemo first came out, he said I was selling fish like crazy. But people would come in, take 2 fish, walk out, never say anything. One
oh.
lady comes in, he goes, I keep killing them. She goes, what are you doing? So I put in a jar with kosher salt.
Kosher food. So she have better luck
So
keeping gefilte fish, maybe.
yeah, so first get the tank established, but people are impatient. They want it to be there and beautiful, like, they see a nice tank. It doesn't happen that way, it takes time.
And even buying a system, like even ready-made system or a package, there is an educational component that needs to come with it. I mean,
Yeah.
I have gone to
Get a book
companies.
first.
I mean, I have gone to companies. I remember Neptune, I remember Apex doing the controllers, because people think that they buy one component and it's going to do everything. And I really, really, when they first came out, I really pushed the idea of like, give a video. Like, we're in the age of technology. Make a video saying step one, do this, or step two, you need to know that, we're trying to reinvent or simplify the way in which we educate the public so that we can avoid that goldfish ending up in Prospect Park, or that Oscar ending up in the lake across the street, because people see them so cute when they're this big, and 6 months later when you got a fish this big, you're like, oh, now I got to get a bigger tank, or I didn't know it was going to do
Again,
that.
a little research before you buy. Like, you don't go out and buy a red-tailed catfish and buy a 10-gallon tank. But the fish store, if they'll sell you anything, most of them, they don't. There's not many fish stores that will actually tell you, no, look, don't do this, do this, and stuff. You're going to spend money, they're happy, and that's wrong. Because you don't think of the big picture. Because if you teach that person the right way, maybe you'll get a second tank. Maybe you'll come back and buy more fish. You teach them the wrong way, the tank's in the pail 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
they call us and donate it
I,
to us.
I think that your experience might be a little bit skewed by living in New York, because I grew up in New York, and that was my impression of pet stores everywhere.
Yeah.
And but traveling around a little bit and going to speak at clubs around the country, there are some pockets of really great hobbyist
I know there are.
communities
I know there are.
that are led by some terrific stores too. So
I
We've
think
been in
that the
stores
more
from up the coast and Baltimore and Jersey and everything,
yeah.
and they were up plenty. Absolute Fish, another one.
Oh,
That's
great.
not that type of fish store. He'll explain
Shout
it. He'll
out
tell
to
you what
Pat
fish,
at
what it goes with.
yeah.
But you got to ask the questions. And some people just walk in and say, "Give me the tank, give me the fish, give me this," and they walk out.
Shout out to
Mhm.
Pat Donston at Absolutely Fish, that actually
Pat is a great
has
guy.
educational programs. I mean, you're absolutely right in mentioning larger cities do tend to focus more on the
Sure.
commercial, where the smaller areas is usually a vested hobbyist which
Right.
runs the store, which he's more likely to
yeah,
say, okay, you want a system, let me tell you the best way to start. Whereas it's not
Mm,
Timmy that's working for the
Yeah.
summer. He's like, how many fish you want? 10 of those? Okay, there's a big difference, and that ends up putting us on the map
Yeah.
for legislation to come out to govern.
Well,
Whereas if we could govern ourselves a little better, you know,
that's one of the things about our club, which we try to teach people, and not to have a killing machine instead of have a fish tank. There's so many things to miss. It's just such a simple thing. Get a book, start off, ask some questions, do a little research first. Today, with the way things are online, it's nothing like when I was a kid. I'm
yeah,
I'm keeping fish now since I'm 10 years old. I'm 60 now. 50 years ago,
yeah,
there was nothing. You got a book once in a while. You figured it out. Now you can search everything online. Not
yeah.
everything online is great.
Not
There's a
everything.
lot of bad stuff there too, but you can learn just about anything. And just
I'm still
people.
pouring vodka in my tank, Steve. No, I'm kidding.
uh,
There was like things come out in shifts, but this is why I this is why I joined the club. First of all, I don't even know how many years it's been now, but to have people like Todd, and to have people over the years to focus on what's going on in the hobby, and to
uh,
show us what we could get. Like, some people don't know that you can get aquacultured fish. They don't know what aquacultured fish is. So
They
this
don't know
is
there's a
why
difference. They don't know if there's a difference even. They you don't hear about, because you don't see that in the store that much, unless it's freshwater, guppies and things like that.
yeah,
You just didn't see a lot of aquaculture saltwater until recently.
yeah.
You're starting to see that now.
Well, I had a guy. I walked into the store when what used to be Thousand Island. I walked in and I literally bumped into a guy spending. I think it was he was hitting the $10,000 mark that day. He was actually buying thousands of dollars. I looked at the guy and I don't know what he was selling, but he had money to spend. He was spending thousands of dollars. Everything was coming to the house, and I said, you know what? Be good, will really help you, to one book that showed them which fish would go together, like the
Yeah,
compatibility
yeah,
chart.
yeah.
Says, no, I don't need that. But you just spend 10,000 on the tag. The
Well, hopefully,
idea
spending that kind of money, he's had fish before and he knows a little bit at
oh, and that
least.
never had
Yeah.
the fish. It was the
Then
first
that's
tank.
just
It
an
was
idiot.
his
That's just
first
an idiot.
tank. He
That's
said
just
it
an
was
idiot.
his first tank, his first saltwater tank. But
You know,
it is
one of the stories I like to tell, Todd, when I worked for the city for years, and one day I'm in one lady's apartment, and the tank 29 gallons, she got it empty. I said, "Why is your tank empty?" She goes, I can't keep this. I keep killing them." I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I fill it up every week, and every Saturday I wash it with palm olive."
That's
Nice.
amazing.
Okay.
So yeah,
So, again, simple things, and I guess it's simple just because we know and we've been doing it. But if somebody that doesn't know, doesn't realize that, never mind the soap, but it's not good to clean tanks all the
yeah.
time. You need that bacteria in there. You need something in there.
And that's our soapbox moment. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, great. I love the presentation. Was there anything else that you were going to mention about biota?
Probably. I don't know.
You gotta visit that. You gotta visit that
It's
facility.
been
I
a
want you
long
to
day.
visit
I
that.
can't remember.
I want you to visit that facility. You come on. All these years, you got to go out there. I want to see a picture of you in the islands with your hand in that tub holding.
I
one
might
of
not
those
come back. North Carolina is a terrific place to be, and I'm excited about what we're doing here as we grow and get, can justify bringing on more manpower. That will hopefully make it easier for me to get out of here for a few days here and there.
That's where you are now, North Carolina, you said?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You miss New York at all?
No.
You said that kind of quick.
Not even a little bit.
Good for you. I'm glad.
I miss my friends there. There is nothing else about New York I miss.
Right.
Oh
I
man.
know. Because I'm the only one in my family just about still lives in New York. Everybody's moved all over the country, California, Florida, whatever. Me, I'm here. My dad's still here. That's it.
I'm ready to go to Florida just because there's better access to fish down there.
That's for sure.
One of my
I can
friends'
have
kids
tubs
around.
outside.
You can go catch your own pythons.
One of my friends' kids
Oh,
around
yeah.
is when
My
one of
wife
friend's
will
kids
love
around is
that.
when you leave, shut the lights. He tells me.
Shut the lights. Well, it's great having you, Todd. Always a
Always good,
pleasure
yep.
having you on here. And shout out to doing great things at Biota and doing great things in the classroom, producing those future aquaculturists of tomorrow. And I hope that we hear one of these guys coming back and maybe they'll give a presentation one of these days.
You will. I guarantee it. I get, so many of my students keep in touch with me, and I'm so proud of the things they're doing now too. So I'm sure
So they're actually listening to you.
some of them. Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's good.
They want to pass. They better be listening.
A lot of my former students are putting me to shame these days, and it warms my heart. So,
but that's got to be satisfying too.
It is. Yeah.
Because you know the way they invested into it. They know they're listening. They're trying. They're not just going through the motions. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's a great thing. I'm working with the kids at the high school, and we got a great veterinary science program over there. Some of these guys become vets and they come back, and this is the way that we're going to change things by teaching them when they're young, sending them out there in the world, making that change.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. I went through our wonderful,
thank you, Todd.
Loyal
Thank you, guys.
It's always good talking to you.
Yep.
Stay well.
Have a great night.
You too.
And yes, sirree, we're going to call it a night for everybody that signed it. Once again, we are trying hard to meet in person. So if you're not a subscriber, click the subscribe button now on YouTube and subscribe to us on Facebook, because we'll be letting you know, God willing, we can meet next month in March if everything falls into place.
Look, we're trying.
We're trying, so you're going to know.
Hopefully not too much longer, and we can get something going. And I'm sure all you guys miss. I know we miss having the meetings and stuff.
And on that note, good night, everybody. Be good to each other, and don't wash those tanks out with palm olive, will you?
Good night. Thank you, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Take care.